Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? How is your summer going? You should be hearing this about summertime. Today's episode with Jen Perry, I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we started to record, we were talking about how difficult it is for us to experience personally rejection and criticism. And there's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's also called RSD. And Jen was saying, I think I have that. And I said, I think I have it too. So we looked it up. And after reading the criteria, it doesn't really look like either one of us have it. If you are interested in hearing more about it, episode 19 is called The Key to Helping Someone with Rejection Sensitivity is Helping Them Develop a Sense of Security with Jared DeFife, PhD. So if you are interested in learning more about it or you want to search it up, it's often paired with people that have ADHD and autism. And if you want to know more about rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. But Jen and I do talk about recently she went through something that was very painful where she felt very rejected, wanted to be the chosen one. And we talked about what that was like for her. And for me, I'm very sensitive to when people ask questions. I feel challenged and I feel criticized. And yet I have this need to ask questions and other people have felt challenged and criticized. So we talk about how do you navigate this in relationships and how do you deal with the disappointment and trusting that you've got resilience in the relationship. We talk about self-disclosure and the stories that we tell ourselves. And when we're in that place of reactivity, to not believe the stories, to get curious, to put a question mark on the end, and finding places that we can air our stories safely, which is why Jen and I talk about the things that we struggle here on the podcast so that it normalizes it for you all. I always think these are great episodes with Jen. I'll let you decide for yourself. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia.
It's been a bumpy week, huh?
It has been a bumpy week.
Yeah. Part of being alive and being human.
Absolutely. Part of having big feelings, right? I was just saying that to someone, like, like I do. I'm feeling big feels and creating that soft space inside me to have those big feelings.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your support this week. I know we've talked a little bit on the podcast about our Marco Polo relationship. And oh boy, did I lean in hard.
It's so easy. And I think that when that wound, because what I've heard you say came up for you is that wound of you being too much. And these are my words. So, kind of being all over the place. And when I have attachment injuries, for me, that's what happens. I definitely have this, like I'm being too much. I'm too needy. I feel dysregulated. I really need someone to just kind of ground me because I feel untethered. And it can feel scary for me to need that in somebody. But what I can say is being on the receiving end for you, like I just feel so honored that you trust me with what's going on. And I feel really connected to you. I don't want you to be suffering, but it's kind of nice being connected and being here for you.
Thank you. Yes, I feel the same way. It's so funny, isn't it? It's really important to air our stories out. I have so many stories that are rooted often, and it's easy to track them into attachment injuries. And then when I'm brave enough to give myself the chance to air them out with you or with other important people in my life, it really gives the moment to have them disproven, right? And I could just feel it. Like it's happened a couple of times in the last couple of days, which I guess is like the gift, right? So the gift of going through something, feeling big feelings, being a human being, which is inherently confusing in my opinion, living in a world where you're supposed to apparently know your SHIT and just like know what's going on all the time. Otherwise something's wrong with you, right? This pathologizing thing that we do, which I kind of think we're going to talk about today, right? Because one of the things I started to wonder is, well, maybe I have this. I think we agreed that that would be a delightful thing to talk about on the podcast.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that, well, two things. With what you went through this week, and my guess is that this happened to you, is we can go through periods where things are very, very intense and they feel hard, but there are like little gems of connection. And I don't know if you felt this, but I know that when I've gone through really hard times and then somebody's there for me, that I'm struggling and things are hard and I'm feeling out of sorts. And this beautiful connection that I get is a gem. And being able to look at both and I think often for people that feel things deeply, when things are intense, we often label them as bad. And then we focus more on the intensity and the out of control, as opposed to what I love to talk about is the both and. So on one hand, with my palm up is the things that are hard. And in the other hand, with the palm up is the sweet connections and the being present to my feelings and noticing. I was thinking about this morning, like in the morning, my puppy comes on the bed and we just have a couple minutes where we kind of cuddle and play, and it's so sweet. And I have to be emotionally open to recognizing that. Otherwise, I get annoyed at the things that she does that bothers me. So using that awareness and mindfulness for those moments of sweetness and connection. I mean, what was your experience this week, or what do you want to say?
Well, this is the type of week I'm having, right? Where I'll have 15 thoughts and then my mind will go blank. And so that's funny having that happen right here, right now while we're recording. I'm just going to, again, speak that. And here it is. And one of my favorite phrases to use is like, can that be okay? Because now I'm not panicking with that, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not making it mean anything. I'm just noticing and observing it. I'm going to also recognize that I'm not sure how, it's funny. I do a lot of self disclosure with clients, and I believe in it a lot because I just over the years heard so much about how helpful that can be. We're human, we learn in stories. But one of my litmus tests is when I self disclose and I share something, like I feel like I fully have my way around it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not about me working anything out. It's just here's my gem, right? Here's the wisdom in the wound. I'm going to offer you the wisdom. I've already done all the messy work of cleaning up the wound. So actually, I'm just kind of curious, even like where I am with it. I don't want to speak too much in specifics about it, but one of the big themes, and I think we all do this, is like to tell ourselves stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? Tell ourselves stories. Our stories are not true. And it's important. The first step is to not believe our stories, to be curious about our stories, to stick a big question mark at the end of our story, to recognize the story that we're telling ourselves. How do we have these conversations where we can air our stories out safely so that they can be heard, understood, and then refuted? And when you're working with a therapist or in the spaciousness in our relationship, it doesn't get a defensive response or a let me argue the details of the story with you, which is, I know when I don't like what I'm hearing in someone else's story because it means something to me about me, I jump to that place, which is not, something I'm trained as a therapist not to do, but I can't do that in my own personal relationships. It's really, really difficult.
Right. But this is also easier because this conflict had nothing to do with you and me. You're having conflict that is outside of our relationship. So I don't have any investment in how you're feeling and what's going on because I'm not your therapist or your coach, but I'm observing this process that goes on with you. I sometimes feel protective and I get angry on your behalf when people say and do things in your life that bug me. And because of our relationship, I can say I'm angry on your behalf. But I also, for you, the listener, that if you're expecting your partner to show up in the way that Jen and I show up for each other, that's not a realistic expectation because our relationship is very simple and uncomplicated. If you have a partner, a sibling, a child, that's a more complicated relationship and that takes a higher level of skills. And I don't know about you, Jen, but I get triggered in my relationship and I get snappy and I am like, I do not show up as my best therapist self in my personal relationships.
No, in fact, we can't. Like, I had a relationship, a long term relationship that in many ways, that was one of the biggest wedges was this expectation of my partner that I was going to, treat them in a certain way that wasn't giving enough space for the fullness of all of me
Mm-hmm.
and all the different roles that we play. Kind of a simple example of this is like I was at a meeting for my son who has been experiencing a lot of bullying in his first year of formal schooling after being a homeschooler. And it's been pretty painful, pretty intense. Really proud of him and how he's coming through it. But I was at the table kind of discussing it. You imagine a school counselor and head of school and all of that. And I've been the school counselor. I've been at that table in other roles. I already have a personality that is pretty nebulous and can see multiple perspectives all the time. So much so that when I was younger, it was really confusing. I'm kind of like, what do I think? Right. And I felt it kind of click into place that in this meeting, my role was my son's mother. And that person needed to freak out a little bit when I wasn't being heard.
Sure.
To be able to be connected, not just with who I am, but what my role was in that moment. So, when we're in these, just to circle back, like when we're in these relationships, like I'm not a therapist, I'm someone's partner, I'm someone's mother, and I'm allowed to really show up authentically. And then, I had a beautiful parent coach put it one way once where it's like, you get messy and then you go back and you look at the mess and you're like, hey, look at that mess that just happened.
Right.
And we can clean up the mess, right? We can understand the mess. We can understand each other more deeply through what's come out in the mess. And I think that's what I'm so curious about right now. So, I have these Marco Polos with you. There's a lot of spaciousness. There's a lot of understanding. I come to a lot of understanding about myself. And then how do I bring that into those other spaces where I am hijacked, I am emotional, I am crying, I am scared in ways that it's like, I don't know. I just get a little, in parts language, a part takes over that feels very intensely that I'm going to be rejected, which is what we were looking at earlier today. Right. Rejection sensitivity and is going to then pathologize and Google that and convince myself that I'm too much and I'm beyond all repair and I'm just going to go into a puddle.
Right. So we're talking about rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. And I've also wondered if I have it because I noticed in certain relationships, I'm very sensitive to what feels like criticism. So we looked up the criteria and maybe I'll read what it is in the intro or the outro to give you some information. But since our recording time is limited, I want to focus on talking about this. But after reading the definitions, you and I both said, I don't think that that's what it is. And that still doesn't mean that we're not sensitive when I perceive that I'm being criticized. I get very defensive. And it's interesting because in the same breath, the way my brain works analytically and my depth of processing, I remember with a vet, because I want to ask a lot of questions. Well, what if we do this? What if we don't do that? Can we do this and wait for that? And I really had a run-in with a vet once because they felt that I was challenging them. And for me, I'm just wanting to really get information so I understand. So the people that I work with need to understand that my questioning isn't challenging, but it's how I sort information. And in the same breath, I think what often happens in my relationships where I feel criticized, someone is just asking for clarification or they don't understand, but I take that position of like, oh, you're criticizing me. You don't trust me.
Yes. I think that is so, so human. And I love that we're talking about it. It's funny, as you're talking, I flashed to a similar experience with a vet. I flashed to a similar experience with a previous partner that any efforts to ask for clarification for deeper understanding were met with as though they were a challenge. And this past weekend, I was in a session with a client where I very deliberately framed a question, which I knew was going to be heard as a challenge, that I'm not challenging it, but I just wanted to know why it was so important to her. And so part of the reason why I love this podcast and the tons of other podcasts that are happening out there, Brene Brown talking about sharing her knowledge, but also putting herself in that, talking about her own therapy. Like we're getting away from this like guru energy that I think has riddled both like terms of like there being experts out there, as well as I realize guru is a religious term in that, that is not a Patricia problem. That is a human being problem. That is something that if we're all really honest, it was like, yeah, I've had that experience. My rejection stuff was showing up more recently is less about criticism, but more about like not being chosen or feeling like someone not wanting to be with me.
Yeah.
Which is extremely painful. I think what led us to like go look it up, which I think is really smart. I would encourage everybody to do that. Like before you diagnose yourself with something, like really read the definition and then go talk to someone and realize the lenses that we use right now in our culture are these pathologizing lenses, which are going to make you feel like somehow you're not a good human. And then that's just not true. That's a lens that we're trying to use to explain things that comes out of this medical model of something's broken, we got to fix it, as opposed to, you know what? Human beings are just these like amazingly bewildered cluster of parts. I know you've heard me say like adulthood is a myth because we all have these little 3-year-old parts still inside of us wailing, you know?
Right.
But yeah, looking up that definition and just hopefully understanding that that's just a way we're trying to communicate information.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to be chosen or picked or feel understood or honored or respected? And I think that those wounds, I'm not sure how to articulate it. Like in your circumstance, that feeling of not being chosen, from how I would language that is like, I want to be the favorite. I want to be the best, the top priority. Or when I feel questioned, it's what comes up for me is like, you don't trust me. You're challenging me. And I'm the one that's doing all the reading and the research. So the context for me is I finally bit the bullet today and I bought the Pet Fluent communication buttons for Maisie. It's a big investment. And of course, I'm doing all the reading and I'm on the Facebook groups. And my husband and I are just really different in how we do things. And so the dog got in the pantry today and he's like, get out of there. I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, all you have to do is go, leave it. You know, that there's language that I'm using. And I have to say that you and I recorded an episode where I talk about testing relationships and you see it differently. And every time I've referenced it, I know you say it differently and I can't remember the language that you use. So I'm sharing that as a way of saying, on one hand, I'm criticizing my husband for not remembering the term leave it consistently. And in the same breath, I know that you use a different term and you don't say testing relationships. So I think it's important for us to be honest about, we can be picky in one area and do the same thing in another way, that there is no right or wrong. And it's not that I'm better than my husband, although I want him to do it my way. I'd feel way more comfortable if he just was like me in this area.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when he asked me questions, we were talking about communication last night. I'm looking at all the nonverbal ways that we communicate and starting to name Maisie's toy. And so we were on the floor and I kept using the word play because we were doing tug and we had a bone and then she has a favorite bear. And I held up both of them and I said, bone, do you want the bone or do you want the bear? And she nudged the bear with her nose. So she's showing me a preference of what she wants to play with. And I was talking to my husband about it at bedtime. And I think he was probably just asking for clarification or he didn't understand why it was significant. And I just had this internal feeling of like, you don't get it. You don't understand. I'm doing all the research. I didn't say anything. I've been a little on edge for a number of reasons recently. So I'm just sitting with it until I get clarity if it passes or if I need to say something. But that's one of the ways that it shows up for me. And then I kind of go into this, I feel inferior because I feel challenged. And then I go into feeling superior because I'm the one that's doing all the research. So how about for you, Jen? Because it's kind of nice right now, this is showing up differently for both of us, which I think is great for people who are listening.
Thank you so much for that validation of who wouldn't want to be chosen, who wouldn't want to. I can reflect a little bit about that back to you, right? Like, yeah, who wouldn't want to be understood and have someone on the same page and to get there? It's interesting. This is where parts, again, I know I speak a lot about parts, but parts work helps me a lot in this because I am well aware that I have grown up parts that are totally okay not being chosen, that wouldn't want this person. So it's funny, just sort of navigating life post-divorce and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And haven't dated in a super long time. And so dating now and having children is totally different, right? Dating
Right.
partners that have children. And I don't want to be chosen first. I mean, I think one of the beautiful paradigms right now with, dating post-divorce is that supporting your partner in being the best parent that they can be, strengthening that. And that's a value. It's a really important part of this relationship. It's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a package deal now. I got these two kids.
Right.
They are my heart. They are central. So anyway, and vice versa, right? So I don't want to be chosen. I want to support this person in choosing their children first. And every once in a while, sometimes it's related to the kids directly. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not even related to that. In fact, it's harder when it's not related to that because then I'm like, wait, what? And because it's a young part of me. So we know how unreasonable young children can be, right? The story starts in with, well, you don't choose me. There's this, there's that, this is, and none of it's true and none of it's not complete. And yet, how do we affirm that longing, right, of that inner child that just wants to be chosen? So it's so tricky. Like, how can we be self-compassionate,
Mm-hmm.
self-empathic, right? Be able to communicate it in a way that it's not in competition. So I can be 1,000% in support of your decision and at the exact same time really disappointed and having a howling inner 4-year-old that just
Right.
is really upset. And can there be space for all of my parts in this relationship? It's a tall order. It
Right.
really is.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what happens is often those young parts haven't had a chance to express themselves. So even though I know you've done all kinds of healing and all kinds of work, that this is a new situation, that this is coming up in a new relationship, and this part hasn't had a chance to express all that disappointment of not being chosen and feeling like you're on the back burner. And I think when we have intense feelings, that the mind wants to create a story. So then we start looking for evidence of where this happened before to justify the intense feelings. And often that comes from not having our feelings validated as kids. To just be able to go, this really makes me mad, or I'm really disappointed, that as children, we often had to build a big case as to why we felt something because the adults in our lives couldn't validate it. So we learned to get very intellectual about everything instead of just going, this really sucks. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely sinking into, in addition to just like the physical sensations of what I'm going through,
Mm-hmm.
separating it out from this story.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
like
that getting in
simple.
your body thing that you do all the time.
It was not fun. Oh my gosh,
I
it's so
know.
painful sometimes.
I
Yeah, but
know.
I do think like there's something to, well, it's funny. I don't know if I ever talked about it on the podcast, but I used to be part of an anger management research team where we would get people sent to us from Philadelphia Gun Court to, much in the way that we treat anxiety, right? Panic disorders. We
Mm-hmm.
evoke panicky sensations in session, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were trying to do that by intentionally pissing people off and
Ay, ay,
getting them to
ay.
tolerate the sensations of anger in their body. It's like so hard, but it's so worth doing. You're making space for those difficult physical sensations because the outburst is thought to come from that inability to be with those difficult feelings. So there's this physical sensations, right? There's the stories I'm telling myself to explain the physical sensations. And then there's the, how do we create safe spaces in relationship to air some of that out? I mean, definitely doing it in therapy is beautiful. Doing it in our Marco Polo exchanges are beautiful. Then how do you do it with partners, children, co-parenting partners, like, and just, I don't know, understanding that being human, I don't know, like holding this I love what you said about both and, because that came up too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and practice. Like, how do we practice this? I always say self-compassion is a practice. Compassion with other people is a practice, which also has to allow for times like, hey, I'm not practicing right.
Right, right. Or if partners have different needs, or in relationships or friendships, different needs for communication, for contact, for intimacy, for spending, for going out to eat, for exercise, for leaving the house and being home. Like, all of these are ways that we have conflict. And how do we navigate this? Because what comes up for me is, if I'm having a need for communication or contact and the other person doesn't, it can activate that sense of feeling rejected. Like, I'm always showing up and here I am. And like, I want to talk and I want to communicate, and somebody else has a different pattern or pace. So part of me wants to pull back because I'm angry and I feel rejected. And then there's another part that is about pacing, that if I'm playing a game of tennis and you're playing chess, then maybe I need to slow my game down a little bit. But if I have this high need that I'm wanting to play tennis and somebody's wanting to play chess, maybe I need to play a couple games of tennis with other people. And it can feel like I'm going, I'm going to withdraw. But sometimes it's just really a matter of pacing as well. That if I need more and somebody else doesn't, then what do I need to do so that I feel fulfilled, stimulated, connected, whatever that is?
Yeah, you're reminding me again of nonviolent communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Marshall Rosenberg's work that these feelings and needs are not in conflict. I love pacing as an element. You're absolutely right. I think that was a big element with what I was going through this week. I'm like my father, not a very patient person. I can get very intense quickly. So, taking that breath, that pace, being more patient. But what I love about nonviolent communication is that the feelings and needs are not in conflict, right? They just are. They're human. They're natural. They arise. We're not in control of them. We all have these, they're not rocket science either, right? We all have these basic human needs, including ones like to autonomy and belonging and all of that, with the strategies to get them met. That's what's in conflict. And that's creative problem solving right there. And a willingness,
Yeah.
right? And being able to give up that defensiveness around it. I think that was a big piece for me, was how do I develop enough self-compassion that I don't have to be so defensive, that I can see the ways in which I'm human or acting like a 3-year-old for
Yeah.
the moment, and to truly be okay with that, and just understand that that's part of being human, but taking care of it responsibly, right? I like that
Right.
feelings are like children. You don't let them drive the car, but you don't stuff them in the trunk either.
Right. Well, and then the other part of this is that we're talking about a little bit is, when do you talk about it? How much do you sit with it to see if it goes away? And as you were talking and I was thinking, my MO tends to be to sit with things longer than I need to, because I don't want to deal with any reactivity on the part of anybody else. So I want to make sure that this is really what I'm thinking and feeling. And I had a conversation with you recently about, like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to make mistakes in relationships, and I don't want to wait until I figure it all out. And I'd rather say what's going on, because there's some other areas of my life where I'm sitting on some things right now, instead of saying, I don't know what it is that I want or need, but I need to name what's going on, because my fear is that the person that this is going on will take an extreme reaction, and I don't have control over that. And so I end up kind of holding the tension there of waiting to see what happens. But because it activates some stuff for me, it makes me a little bit on edge, which isn't good for anybody.
How to take care of yourself while you're on edge, right? Because it is that risk. It's risking that
Yeah.
vulnerability of making a mess. It's trusting the resiliency of the relationship, right? It's trusting in the capacity to repair. It's risking the failure of the relationship in favor of being authentic. So then you really do get a real relationship, though, because if we
Right.
don't, then we don't have that insight. I love that. I think I'm so glad we're talking about this, because like that's the delicate balance. And it feels like a tightrope to me. I don't think it truly
Hmm.
is. I think the more we have these discussions and the more we lay down some groundwork, and if we could just have, I mean, we talk about emotional literacy. Unfortunately, this is where I get critical of our field, right? I think we've done more harm than good with pathologizing it, making it a shameful
Hmm.
thing. But if it can be more of like no, we're all a little nutty, like we develop this way. Like nothing bad has
Right.
happened, and that it's not a tightrope we're walking. It's actually a really nice wide path to explore and to stay curious about, and not even always calm. Because what you're saying is like, can I get messy sometimes? Do I have to always hold back to make sure that there's all this certainty kind of stuff? And I think I don't have an answer for you there. Of course, a lot's context dependent, but I think if we can trust in resilience, if we can trust in repair, if we can, I don't know, just give each other space to figure it out.
Yep. Well, and I think for some people, if you tend to be the type of person that is very impulsive and needs to spout out everything, then you may need to be holding back. For someone like me that tends to hold back more, then you may need to be someone who needs to speak up and be willing to be messy. These are conversations we can continue to have as well. And if you're interested in this and you like this, shoot me an email at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Give me lots of detailed information about what's going on and what you want to hear about. And if it's something that Jen and I are comfortable talking about, or I can address in a solo episode, I'm really happy to do that. But I need lots of information, because, like Jen talks about, context is so important.
I would love that. I love it when we do questions.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be fun. Thank you, Patricia.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
on behalf of everybody who listens to this wonderful podcast, for all of your heart and soul that you pour into it.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for being here with me. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great day.
You too, my dear.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know how that was listening to that, and what are the wounds that show up for you? Is it the being too much? Is it being disappointed, being left out, feeling like you're being criticized, all of the things that we talked about. If you're feeling any of those, guess what? You're human. My hope is that you found it helpful. If you want support around any of these areas, things with relationships, parenting, boundaries, perfectionism, gosh, just all the human things that Jen and I talk about that we struggle with, you're welcome to reach out to either one of us. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. For some reason, when y'all are sending me consults and I respond by email, I think my emails are going into your spam. So please check your spam folders. And if you've reached out to me in the past and I haven't responded, check your spam folders because I'm really good about responding, but I often don't hear back from people. And I don't know if you've just changed your mind. So just putting that out there. I hope you are doing well. Please know that I appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.